Hey all, it feels like it's been ages since I last posted a video. Isn't it strange that one-way communication can still sort of feel like connection? I feel pretty disconnected from you all with the last couple of weeks being as busy as they have been. I do hope that you got a little bit of downtime or refresh of some sort over your spring break. Mine was a change of pace, but not especially restful, as I was taking care of a sick child the first half and being sick myself the second half. Fortunately, we seem to all be past the illness, and this last week, as you can tell from my gear, has been a busy one for my family as my daughter does Irish dance, and this is the time of year that everybody wants them to come. So if I have not been especially available the last 2 weeks, I just want to acknowledge that if you're feeling disconnected or like I'm not available, it's not your imagination. But it's done. Tomorrow is the last day since it's actually St. Patrick's Day. And our performances will be the last of this kind of season, and I will be not splitting my attention quite so much. It's probably more information than you wanted, but I like to be transparent. So I am still making my way through your posts from the week of trauma. I know that I promised a video last week with some more information, and frankly, I'm struggling to narrow down what I want to say about it, because in the area of trauma, this is my bread and butter, right? This is my field that I've been invested in and engaged in for a long time. And so my tendency, again, I've said this before, but my tendency is to want to dive deep into how we conceptualize trauma, how we treat trauma, how we help participate in the healing of trauma. And that goes beyond the scope of this class. I am still going to post some resources for you in that extra tab, that I added for resources, because I just want to acknowledge that in the recorded videos for the recorded lectures, they talk about some of the approaches, modalities that are approaches to treating trauma, but there are so many more. And part of that is that the approaches that Dr. Mabry mentioned are more cognitive approaches. There is tremendous effectiveness. I mean, the data makes it clear. We can't question that. The effectiveness of approaches like prolonged exposure, CPT or cognitive processing therapy, and trauma-focused CBT, which is more geared towards children and adolescents. Certainly effectiveness in those approaches. However, there's kind of the other end. Those are sort of the head down approaches to processing trauma, and then there are the body up approaches, and then there are the ones that are kind of a combination of the two. And so I'm sure you've heard of EMDR. Brain spotting is a therapy that is a takeoff from EMDR, kind of a more focused version of EMDR. There are the parts work approaches. The most well-known and most discussed it seems to be internal family systems, Dick Schwartz's work. It's incredibly effective, but we have to acknowledge that it's not the only approach to parts work. It is, as many therapies have developed, they take what we know from previous approaches and they conceptualize it in a new way and add something to it or kind of repackage it. I don't mean that they're stealing anything. I just mean that most therapies that we know as modalities now are sort of an evolution of the work that others have done. And so that's an especially important discussion when we're talking about parts work, because while the names of other approaches to parts work might not be as famous as IFS, they way predated. And I'm talking about, some are native, or culturally based, more organic, sometimes native, sometimes founded in a culture, sometimes, just cultural practices from all different places in the world that approach things from this sort of idea of parts. In general, there is so much room for healing from trauma in connection, which means that there's as many different ways to heal as there are ways to connect. So I'm a big fan of evidence-based approaches to trauma work. I think hanging up a shingle and calling ourselves a trauma therapist when what we really mean is that we're just going to talk about your trauma isn't really evidence-based and isn't really trauma-informed, because we have to have, particular ways to do that. Just talking about somebody's trauma is not necessarily going to heal it. So I just wanted to acknowledge that there are so many different approaches that can be effective, and some of them are very scientific and evidence-based. And of course, in a program like this MSW program that is based on evidence-based practices, we're going to really encourage those, and I absolutely encourage them. But I will say that evidence-based practice and cultural-based practices that may not yet or may never have an evidence base are not mutually exclusive. You don't have to pick one or the other. I often liken understanding a particular modality to cooking. So if you have never cooked before, or you've never baked before, and you decide that you want to make blueberry muffins, and you throw a little bit of this in and a little bit of that in, and some blueberries that you didn't think to drain, and you expect it to make a muffin, but you've never made a muffin before, and you've never read a blueberry muffin recipe, and you don't really understand how baking works, you're going to have a mess on your hands because you're trying to make it up as you go. However, if you're one of those people that has made blueberry muffins every week since you were like 8 years old, or even littler, helping your grandmother or your mother make muffins, and you have made muffins by the same family recipe so many times that without even thinking about it, you know exactly what to put together. Then at that point, you know the recipe so well that you can go, one time I made muffins and they were a little fluffier. I wonder what would happen if I added an extra egg. Let's try adding an extra egg. Or today I just want something really dense. Right? So I'm gonna adjust this thing in the recipe to make, the muffins turn out differently. My husband actually made blueberry muffins last week, and one of the pans that he usually uses was dirty, and so he poured a lot more batter into the ones in the pan that was clean, and they were monstrous. I mean, they were still fine. They tasted okay. The texture was a little bit different because it's not the way that we normally make blueberry muffins. So all that to say, when you are approaching trauma, or any of the mental illnesses that we're talking about, you need to know the modality that you're approaching it from really well before you start to add other components. So when I say that evidence-based practices and more culturally based practices, or sort of natural wisdom, you can mix them together, but make sure that you're clear and you know exactly what you're mixing together. Because in order to assess whether the things that you're using to approach whatever you're trying to treat, unless you're really clear on the methodology that you're using and what it is you're trying to treat, you're not going to have a really clear way to assess whether it's effective or what was effective. So I just wanted to say those few things about trauma and various approaches to treating trauma, because I feel like this is, I don't just feel like, I know that this is one of those areas where there is so much information out there. There's conflicting information. Some people are so determined that the only effective way to treat trauma is with the EMDR. And other people are so determined that the only way to approach trauma effectively and in an evidence-based way is through one of the more cognitive processing methods, like prolonged exposure or cognitive processing therapy or trauma-focused CBT. There's a lot of different ways to do it. There's a lot of different ways to treat trauma. And yeah, you need to be, being trauma informed doesn't mean you read a book once. It means you're continually learning, you're continually engaging, you're continually watching the dynamics that happen when you work with people who have been traumatized, and understanding how deep that work goes. There are several books, if you're interested in digging in further to trauma. If you've had the chance to take the trauma elective, then you've seen some of them. But I really want to encourage you, as you think about treating trauma, to choose sources for learning that are from a variety of cultural perspectives. Some of the most famous current trauma experts out there are incredibly knowledgeable. They've done amazing work, and we have a lot that we can learn from them. And they are North American or European white males who have a North American or European white male experience. Doesn't mean what they're sharing with us is not effective or based on research or based on a tremendous amount of wisdom, and that their work and their concepts haven't helped a ton of people, because they certainly have. Absolutely. And there's more to know than what you can learn from those most famous of names. I'm not trying to put anybody down, because their resources that come from them are incredibly helpful, and can flip everything you thought you knew about trauma on its head. And I recommend having that experience, frankly. But expand to some other voices. Listen to some other voices besides the white male ones from Europe and North America. So enough about that. Again, I'm going to share some resources. I'm just having a hard time narrowing it down to what I want to share with you in the context of this course. Really quickly, this week, you're going to be learning about neurocognitive and delirium disorders. And I do not claim expertise in this area. I really don't. I haven't. I certainly have had clients who have dealt with this, whether medically or because of something like Alzheimer's, but I do not claim to have a lot of expertise. And I share that with you, not because I'm saying, well, I don't know what to tell you, but because I'm saying, be honest when you don't have the expertise. When I have had clients come in who are dealing with something in this category, the first question is always, have you talked to your doctor? Are you getting medical treatment for this? It's not to say that some therapy, especially if you're doing general therapy, it couldn't be helpful, as a support as people are adjusting to really painful things, and watching themselves decline, or their family members are needing some support as they watch their loved ones decline. So certainly, therapists have a really strong place in this field. But let's make it very clear that this is a medical issue, and a therapist is not going to be enough to treat that. And so we want to make sure that our first question is always, are you getting medical attention for these issues? And Dr. Mabry says that. I'm just repeating what he says, but we can't emphasize it enough. The other thing I want to say really quickly is, for many of us, this is a really tough topic. I personally it's been tough to go through this material for this week because, it's like many of us. It has been very close to home. I have a dear friend who is very, very, very advanced into Alzheimer's, and she's 57 years old, and she was a corporate consultant and an entrepreneur and a marathon runner and a CrossFit person and a vegan, and she did all the right things. And genetically, she and her father, who's in his 90s, are both declining at the same time, and it's terribly sad. But compassion is one of the things that helps us be really good at what we do. So I encourage you to take your time. If this content is tough for you to work through, you can't really avoid it because it's part of the course, but take your time and be gentle with yourself. Be kind to yourself as you go through it. If there's a particular video, that feels like too much for you, maybe turn on the closed captions and just read the script instead, because sometimes the editing and the music and the acting in some of these videos is what makes it really emotional. If you absolutely need to skip something, then, take care of yourself. But I just wanted to acknowledge that any of these topics, really, any of these weeks, it can be hard to deal with some of this content if it has struck close to home. But for whatever reason, this one feels tougher. So I just want to encourage you to, just take your time, be kind to yourself. So that's it. The exam will be posted Tuesday. Hopefully, late Monday night and open like at 12:01 Tuesday morning. That's my plan. But if it's not up till Tuesday evening, you're still going to have the equivalent of an entire week to get it turned in, because I'm going to extend. I haven't changed the date yet, but I'm going to extend that deadline till the 25th. And over this next week, I will send a Google form to kind of gauge when a couple of good times or feasible times might be for us to do a Zoom meeting, for those of you who have questions about the memoir paper. I'm going to tell you now, for those of you who are already writing or already, thinking about it, that I'm likely to shorten the paper. It'll be one of those things where I'm going to really encourage you to be succinct. I have seen people get these assignments done in basically half the number of pages. For some of you, it's really tough and you just can't quite squeeze it in. And typically I'm flexible with that. But I'm going to do it for a couple of reasons. One is you will get feedback quicker from me if the paper is shorter. That's less important. But the other is, as you approach the end of the semester, I know everybody just has lots of papers and projects and all kinds of things going on, and you all have life going on. And so I'm inclined to shorten the assignment a little bit. I may actually do the assignment different in future, so that it's not one more big paper for people to write, but you still get the benefit of the process of assessment. So again, make sure that whatever you're reading, if it's not from the approved list, there's tons of books out there that are not on that approved list that would work really well for this assignment, but just make sure you run it by me if you're not going to use one of the ones on the assigned list, because we want to make sure that there is enough content that is specific to symptoms and experience of living with a mental disorder in the book, so that you can do a thorough assessment. So that's it. Exam coming Tuesday. You will have that full week to do it. For any of you who have accommodations that you need something different, just email me and we'll work something out. And then during this week, as you're all working on the exam, I'll send out a message with a Google Doc link or a Google form or whatever they're called, so we can find a time that works for people who might have questions about the memoir assignment. Okay, I've talked long enough. So hopefully that answers whatever questions you have. If you have more, let me know. And hopefully this helps us get caught up and reconnected as you continue the semester. And I hope you all got a little rest over spring break. And I will talk to you soon. Bye.